and then they're like, it has to be given. You have to give it up willingly, you just can't take it. And then she gives him a second chance to keep the brooch, and he's like, no, this is my bargain, I need the cauldron. So he gives her the brooch. Then he asks if they can use the tools that the enchantresses have in their shed to destroy it. They say that's okay, it's part of the plan. And then Taryn took the hammer to the cauldron, but it didn't even dent, it wasn't hurt at all. And then the enchantresses explain that there's no way to destroy, there's only one way to destroy it, and that's if someone willingly goes inside the cauldron. Yep, okay. So they decide where did I go? I skipped a page. Yeah, okay. They try to think of a different way because they don't want to like make someone go in there because they'll die if they go into the cauldron. And they think of burying it, hiding it, but that won't work. And then Gwydion planned to bring the cauldron to Dalbin. So they're like, okay, that's what we have to do. And then Taryn, he didn't dare venture across the marshes again. He just decided to travel the edges of the swamp. So they begin traveling. They decide they need a break after traveling, and they camp on an open heath. After the others have fallen asleep, Taryn, he was just left in his own brain thinking of stuff, and he thought of the brooch and began to weep over his loss. And then they wake up to think of a plan on how they're going to move the cauldron, and so they make a sling out of branches and vines, and it helps to lift the cauldron and carry it, but even with the sling, it was a painful and slow journey. They have a tough time carrying it through the cold and dense trees. Taryn nearly gives up at this point. Eilinwy tells them that they've already made it so far, so they can't stop. They arrive at the river of Tevrin.
Yeah, I think that's okay.
And they struggle on deciding how to get the cauldron over, where they're gonna cross. They finally decide to cross over the river. While crossing, Bard ended up breaking his arm, and he believes that the cauldron actually did it on purpose. And then Taryn finds out it's not the arm that the Bard is worried about, it's more his harp, but the harp is actually okay, don't worry. They had to figure out how to get the cauldron out of the water because it's now stuck in between boulders, and without any luck, Taryn decides that they just camp where they are for the rest of the day. Tomorrow, when we have our strength back, we can try again. There may be some other way of getting it out. I don't know. It is tightly wedged, and everything we do seems to make it worse. And the bushes that they were sat next to begin to rustle, and a figure steps out from the edge. And that's it.
Alright. So I had chapters 17 through 20. And then, like she said, at the end of chapter 16, they hear, like, a rustle in the bushes, and then when they, like, hear that, they wake up and they see that it's Eliter, and he was gone, I think, in your chapters, and he left, and he finally, like, returns, and when Turan sees him, he's very upset because he realizes that, like, Eliter, like, abandoned them when they needed him the most, because he left when, like, the huntsmen, or, yeah, that's who they were called, were after them. And then Eliter tells them that he had to leave Anuvan because the whole city was run by those crazy huntsmen. And Eliter gets really furious because he sees the cauldron out in the water, and he feels very betrayed because his whole mission was to leave and go get the cauldron. So Turan asks Eliter to politely help them get out of the water because Turan knows that his horse's name is like Islamak or something like that. Yeah, and it's a very strong horse, so he's just asking politely for like him to help him get it out. So then after that, like these three, what's it called, like gwynts, they're like big black birds, and they are like the owners of the original Black Cauldron, and those are the birds that like the king sent out to find the cauldron, and they do end up finding it, but they aren't like hurting the people because the only thing they care about is the cauldron. So when they find the cauldron, they immediately fly away. So then Eliter knows what's going on, so he's like, okay, I will finally help you. And he says, there's a quote on page 147, and it says, "He turned to Turan, but these are my conditions," he said. "The croaking is mine, and you shall be under my command. It is I who found it, not you, pig boy. It is I who fought for it and won it. So you shall say to Gwydion and the others, and you shall all hear the most binding oath." So Turan doesn't want to do this, but he knows that they have to like get the cauldron somewhere safe and to get rid of it because it just keeps bringing bad things. But then E-Leader, like, he doesn't really trust Turan, so he really doesn't believe him still. So he pulls his sword out on him, and then they get into a fight, and then that's the end of chapter 17. And then chapter 18 starts when Turan he pushes him in the water, so then they all pull him out of the water, and then Turan wakes up after being beaten by E-Leader, and then he realizes that E-Leader is actually gone, and Turan's horse is gone, all the horses are gone, and the cauldron is gone, so he realizes that he stole the cauldron, and then he gets really frustrated with his group because he is like, why didn't you try to fight for it, like, what were you doing? But he didn't realize that E-Leader tried to kill them as well, so they were also kind of hurt too. And then after he starts arguing, they look over the hill and they see like someone on a horse running to them, and then they see that it's King Morgant, and then he appears and he lets the group know that he has captured E-Leader and that the cauldron is supposedly safe. So then they're like, and then he tells them to come back to his camp and we can figure something out. So they agree, and they follow King Morgan back to his camp. And then when they get there, the king leads them into like a tent so that they can just warm up and then have a place to stay. And when they walk in there, Turan sees that E-Leader is like tied to a chair or something, and that he's been severely beaten. So he gets a little confused and he's wondering why he was beaten up. And then when they're in there, King Morgan looks at his soldiers and tells them, he orders his men to disarm Turan and the others and tie them up as well. And then there's a quote on 160 that says, "At a call from Morgan, armed guards strode quickly into the tent. The war leader made a brief gesture towards Turan and his companions, and he said, 'Disarm them and bind them fast.'" All right. And then chapter 19 is when they realize that King Morgan is a traitor, and that he just wants the cauldron all for himself, even though if he wants to use it for good or bad, it doesn't matter. He just wants it for the wrong reasons. And then King Morgant makes a deal with Turan and says that if Turan agrees to serve Morgant as his war leader, and if he does this, like whenever King Morgant needs to go to war, Turan will be there by his side, and if he agrees to this, then he will not kill him and his friends. So he doesn't want to do this, so he tries to trick Morgant by offering himself to jump into the cauldron so he could become a cauldron-born soldier. But Morgan just kind of laughs at him and is like, well, you're kind of dumb because I did my research. I know that if someone willingly jumps in there with the intention of knows what's going on, is that the cauldron is going to shatter into pieces. So then Turan is kind of like struck by that. He's like, well, now I don't know what to do. So he thinks about it, and then King Morgan just leaves, and he's like, I'll give you some time to think about it, and I'll come back in like an hour or so, and you can tell me what you thought. And then Turan agrees that he is going to agree to the terms, but he isn't going to follow through with it because he says, because the oath was given under the threat of death, it's technically not true, so I don't have to follow it. And then E-Leader after this happens, E-Leader wakes up from being beaten, and he realizes, like, I shouldn't have done that, and he apologizes to Turan and his friends for what he did. And then in chapter 20 is the very last chapter, and they're trying to figure out how to escape this. So they like look out the tent and they see that it's completely covered with like soldiers and everything. So they're coming up with a plan, but then they hear like sword swiping, and then they realize that Dolly, the dwarf, comes to rescue them, and then he comes in and unties them quickly. But now they still need to find a way to like get out without the soldiers killing them. So E-Leader, he doesn't even tell them what's going on. He just quickly gets untied and he runs outside. And then they see him and they start fighting. And then he starts fighting with King Morgant, and then he sees the opportunity And then after he gets stabbed, he has nowhere else to go, so he quickly runs to the cauldron and he jumps in the mouth of it and it shatters. And then on page 172, there's a quote that says, a few paces from the cauldron, struggling madly, a leader broke free of the warriors. Then with a cry, he flung himself into the Kroken's gaping mouth. So then after he jumped into the cauldron, his horse, Islamak, realized what had happened, and then the horse is so hurt that it jumps off a cliff. And then after that, another king that's brought in is King Smat. He actually kills King Morgant and his men because he knows that what they did was very wrong. And then after that, Gwydion comes back into the story and tells Turan that Morgant still deserves the honor no matter what he did, because he was still a good man. He just had a thirst for power, and he just did everything for the wrong reasons. And then again, Gwistel comes back at the end of the story, and because Turan had such a fascination with his crow caw, he actually gives him the crow, and then the story's over.